I could hear it really well. Do you think it translated really well?
The audio?
Yeah, I could hear it very well.
Well, we did get a new audio Magicrific player to play over the line.
Oh, did you hear that buzzing too? That text message
Yeah,
buzzing? Yeah.
yeah.
That's also very spectacular.
Are you suggesting we don't have the best audio on the DJ Ron show?
No, no. I've always said, uh, if anything, good evening.
Hello.
We've been on this trend of diving like right into things.
Yes. Well, it was due to listener feedback and complaints.
Yeah. So we've been on this trend of diving straight into things. I didn't really have any particular topic because, well, for a number of different reasons, but I, like you, Dana, I think you're still fasting from media, at least avoiding
Yes.
it.
Fasting from food sometimes and fasting from media.
Fasting from food, fasting from media. Jeff, are you doing the same thing?
I've been on a extended fast with intermittent feasting for a long time because I'm just really not that informed, to be honest.
So, do you mean that you're just non-existent and therefore, or partly non-existent, and therefore you've avoided those things that you don't need because you don't exist at certain times?
Don't exist. I think I always exist, but I think what I mean is that most of what I encounter in the media is by the radio when I'm driving. Also during breaks, I've been turning it on, so that's mostly NPR, and then also via something like Facebook or social media where somebody posts something and then I look into it a little bit. But beyond that, I'm not really doing a lot of searching myself, and that's been for a little while.
Yeah,
And
I was gonna say that seems pretty consistent with how you've been for quite some time.
well, I think though I would read things and then I would talk with Jeff about them, and then Jeff would get very easily interested. So then he would dive into the fact checking. So maybe because I've been bringing up less current events, well, really just Jeff's just like a wasteland as far as pop culture and all that.
No,
well, not pop culture, as current events.
Well, how about not a wasteland? How about he is a receptor. He's a when you give out a signal, right? When you're putting something out there, he's receiving.
I'm kind of like the rudder of this ship in a lot of ways, I guess. If I'm engaged in something that lights his fire and then he comes alongside. Probably. Is that right, Jeff?
Whatever you say, Dana.
This is amazing. I didn't know our marriage was like this. But yeah, I think though my lack of clicking
partnership or marriage.
I think we're a marriage. I don't really know. I mean,
I think
partnership.
it's more politically correct to say that we're partners.
Yes. So, yeah, I've definitely withdrawn, and then maybe that just
Has
really
caused him.
keeps us. I guess. I mean, we talk a lot, so there's room. There's a lot of room made for other things when you pull away from media. So, what's been filling your plate, Ron?
Well, as you know, um, I've been, well, as evidence by the things I've sent you previous to the last week. The last week I haven't done too much because, well, you inspired me a little bit. Because periodically I will do I will back away from media. And so I decided to do that a little bit this week, actually a lot. Haven't been paying too much attention to what's going on. But I mean, with that said, I've watched a few things, not much, but have watched a few things. Nothing standing out though. I mean, nothing's, at least as far as the media is standing out. I think it's the same stuff. When I hear something, I ask all the same questions I normally do, and I know that once you dig a little bit deeper, some of the information that you're initially presented ends up being a little bit different. But that's
Yes.
okay. I mean, that is, from what I've experienced, pretty standard. So, oh,
I
that,
think that's an encouraging buzz. I think Jeff is saying, keep going.
oh, I was thinking maybe it was like one of the fans, like saying, "Hey, can you bring up this? Can you talk about this?" That was maybe,
Oh, it might be. It might be.
yeah. So, I mean, last week you brought up a couple things. Um, we talked about, the idea. Well, you have been paying too much attention to the media. You've been kind of reserving it for what you've been referring to as space, right? You have more space in your brain for other things.
Yes.
Um, what what have those things been? I mean, what have you entertained? What have you been entertaining? If I obviously you don't have to share it all, nor would you share it all, but anything anything you can share?
Well, last week, um, and this will be familiar to everybody who listened last week. I think I just emptied a whole bucket of stuff that I've been thinking of, and it was largely to do with spiritual things, church, the Holy Spirit. And so I have tried to stay on that same track this week, or this past week, and I think I have been a little more distracted. Um, on the days that I'll fast, it's amazing how focused I am. I guess that's one big reason why we're encouraged to fast. And it's really hard to maintain that same level of focus on days where I enjoy food. So I've been on the same track, maybe not with as much oomph, but definitely more focused than usual. So all the same
That's
things I mentioned last week, looking for the reality of God and connection and trying to do things the way that is laid out in the Bible, trying to stick to that very closely.
yeah.
And yeah, that's so while I'm aware of things, I'm still on Facebook. I still see headlines. I have nibbled on some non-religious media, but for the most part, I've just tried to stick to things that are in the spiritual realm, and it's been good. Like maybe this will be just the way I go forward, and I'm really looking to have more of a reality, given that I'm assuming that the biblical Christ is true, is the true path to God. So
Why? Can
that's
I
about
can
it,
I
bro.
No, no, that's good. That's good. Can I ask can I ask a question? I think it is something that's pretty common, at least with people that tend to lean on the spiritual side, including myself. I'll open it up to both of you. But why is there this this desire to kind of back away from media and pull away from that during certain periods of time? Because I do that too. Like I said, this last week I've been doing that. Why do you why do you feel there's that desire to not pay attention to what's going on in the media and news and focus on other things? Any thoughts on that?
I guess because I maybe I really just can't, like I said, I can't hold that much in my head at once. If I read some type of story, I'll think about it. It really lives in my mind. I think about the people's motivations. I think about all the things we've talked about as far as questioning sources. Then when I have, spare time on my phone, or say I'm just, I'm multitasking, I'll click further stories and updates because things are updated so often. And it just really becomes like a train of thought that I keep touching back on the whole day. And I can't seem to naturally balance things. It seems like I have to pick a focus. And so I the last 2 weeks have tried to pick more of a kingdom of God focus. And maybe that's just the way I am. But as far as like using my phone and constantly going back to it throughout the day, I really like how if it is um, done with the spiritual focus, it does seem to be really fulfilling. And then by the end of the day, I don't feel regret that I wasted a lot of time pursuing some story that relates very little to my personal life.
No, that's Jeff. Any any thoughts? I know this has been an ongoing theme for you for quite some time, maybe for different reasons. Um, but I know you'll, if you're presented with information, you'll actively pursue it. Um, but it does seem like I think without you being presented with the information, you tend to avoid it or not seek it, not avoid it, but I don't think you're actively like, I could be wrong,
No, I
researching
think
or
you're right, and I think it's been a sort of a long progression, which might have a variety of reasons, which I'd have to think a little bit more about. But one of them I know is real. Is at some point I realized that all of these conversations mean nothing to these actually events that we're talking about. All these opinions and all these, let's call it sparring of ideas, have no real outcome for what seems to be the real world. It's more of almost an academic dialogue, although it doesn't, it's not described that way, but it has no real actual day by day in and day out purpose that I can see. That might change if I was a politician. Like if I was a mayor of this city, I think that I, as part of my job requirement, would need to know the ins and outs of all of the big issues, certainly, and then the smaller issues, I would, you try to figure out how you cover all the issues. But just for a city, I imagine that that would be your job, and you'd be making decisions. Or if I was a council member, similarly, if I was on the school site council governing the extra funds for a school, I would really need to learn a lot about the things that I was voting on. And similarly, if I was a senator or congressperson, or if I was in a position where I was a lobbyist or I was some person who was involved with campaigns, I could see it being useful. But there was a certain point where it sort of just dawned on me that all this talk and time is going into the thin air and just kind of flying away like a bird. That's one thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
or like maybe for some of these crime stories that we get interested in, unless you're the criminal, or I guess unless you're the accused or the victim or the jury or judge or police, what you think, I mean, likely doesn't really matter.
And
well,
for a short stint of time, I was a little bit more involved with local politics, and I found that to be much more rewarding because you can actually have an idea, share with the person who's in power. They can possibly act on it, and you can actually see something happen
Yeah.
within your city. Like a silly little example of one that I didn't do, but I'm aware of somebody else who has that kind of mindset where you can bring about change in the city. They wanted to block off one of the entrance ways to our street because cars will cut off the freeway when there's, let's say, traffic, and they'll go through our neighborhood and they'll get back on the freeway. And if you just put a blockage on the median so cars can't go through, that idea doesn't really work out. So somebody wanted to do it. They got the signatures for the street, petitioned the council. They said yes, and then sure enough, the meeting is now blocked off there, making it harder to get through. And in a really pertinent way, I want to say that might be more meaningful than any of the conversations I've ever had with anybody about politics. I was expecting you to say something wrong.
well, oh no, sorry, I muted myself.
You were just in shock.
No, 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 no.
Yeah.
That's no. I tend to no. I think for a lot of years, you've mentioned being involved in local politics and how that is more effective,
Meaningful.
and meaningful and
Yeah.
effective. I think you can affect change in a greater way when you're like practically involved in it. I would say this, that the conversations about these kind of broader, more popular media topics, although although they seem to kind of disappear into thin air. The one thing that I would say, I've mentioned it before, is that I think it's been helpful to be able to think through some of this stuff, because I think when you hear something, it's important to be, at least from my perspective, kind of a more critical thinker and ask questions. And so,
Yes.
yeah, so although I agree sometimes the topics themselves they might not have a whole lot of effect on your personal life, but um, they do seem to help kind of think through some things. And if you're asking questions, it does become meaningful because it does allow you to kind of rethink or think through your position on things, think through like how you feel about certain things. We've talked about racism quite a bit, which personally has caused me to kind of examine my thoughts on that. And so I think that's been meaningful. I think it's been helpful. I wouldn't say that it necessarily is, affecting change in any particular way other than affecting change in my own thought process. But that could extend beyond that. I mean, you know, you have conversations periodically, and when I'm talking to people, because of some of the conversations I've had in the recent past, and not just in the recent past, but through the many years that we've been doing this, has kind of caused me to think a different way. I don't know if you feel the same, but for me anyway, I feel like there's been some positives.
Yeah, I think we would probably both agree. Like, and Jeff mentioned the intellectual exercise of it. I think we all enjoy that. Or, I mean, I enjoy talking about things and thinking through things. I think for me, and I guess Jeff too, it just does seem to, it's taken on too much of our time. And like almost like if, you know, you were, or we were devoting hours to baseball practice every week, like 10 hours. And then we take a step back and think, do we really need to devote this much time to baseball practice? Um, so there's a place for it, right? These current events and logic, and at the dinner table a lot. Jeff will do logic questions with the children, or we might talk about these current events. And I think it is good for the children to examine perspectives, and then we talk about what certain relatives think, and we go, I'm not just trying to hammer in a certain perspective, but I do want them to be able to look at an argument in a detached way. So yes, it's all good stuff, but it's not what I want my main thinking to revolve around.
So, do you, with that said, and not wanting to be consumed with it, do you feel like when, at the times, and again, I don't think there's anything wrong with periods of time where you dig in a little bit, and you have times when you're backing away from it, right? That's just kind of how things work. I think, you know, you for a while might be into some media stories or following it, and then for a period of time you say, nah, I'm not going to really pay too much attention to that. I'm going to focus on some other stuff. I see that as, well, I feel like that's the normal thing. I don't, like I said last week, I don't know anybody personally that's pays a whole lot of attention to what's going on in the media anyway. And I say that, I could be wrong about that, but I'll say I don't know anybody that's vocal about it personally. I mean, I am part of some online communities, people I don't know in some different groups, but I don't know these people. I don't know them. Well, I want to say I don't know them personally, but they're not they're not my day-to-day influence and sphere of influence. And so I feel like a lot of that is pretty typical. When most people, I'll say this, most people I know or I interact with aren't really paying too much attention to what's going on in the media. I don't really ever have conversations other than with you guys and some people online about stuff that's going on in the news. And I rarely see anybody posting about stuff like that. People I personally know.
Yeah. I
I
think a
don't
lot
I
of people don't do that, or some people probably don't do that on purpose because they know what it can turn into. I can think of a few people who I think left Facebook during the presidential election, and I think liberal or conservative, they just had enough of the debate. I think one person even mentioned just seeing sides of people that she thought were her friends or something that she just was really disgusted by.
That was me.
So that was you? That was a
Mhm.
her though. What? Um, oh, she
Yeah.
saw what you posted and then she was disgusted and left
No,
Facebook.
that was me. I just couldn't handle seeing the different sides of people, Just too much.
It wasn't safe.
It wasn't safe. I was not feeling safe.
Yeah, well, I know. You know what? I
Well,
will
and that's what
wear,
protests
Jeff and I will be
always do.
stormy we said stormy normies, or I said stormy normies. Me and Jeff can be stormy normies going forward.
Do you feel like you are kind of a normie in that category? I mean, do you feel like that's pretty? I feel like that's pretty standard. I feel like it's pretty standard not to. I will say this. I will say this. I don't have a lot of conversations about current events or things going on in the media or world events, international events, and for many years prior to the last 5, 6, 7, several years. Prior to that, I did try to initiate many conversations and found out that, yeah, it didn't seem like it was going too well, or there's a lack of interest. And so, therefore, I came to the conclusion that it's not really something a lot of people are interested in. And that said, it kind of caused me to say, well, I'm somewhat interested in it. I find it a little bit fascinating, and kind of more and more I researched over the years, and I did find other communities, online communities, of people that that is their thing, whether it be like conspiracy theories or just news, current events, topics like that. There does seem to be a community of people out there that are interested in those things, but I would say very few, and especially very few that I come in contact with personally.
Yeah.
Although I've had a couple, not very many, but a couple.
I think for me in person, I actually do sometimes like to. Well, actually, I probably do like to talk about, say, the like media, current events, or the topics we've talked about on this show. I will talk about those things with other people. And one thing I notice I try to do is not necessarily just debate the points that they're trying to make. Sometimes people get very angry, and so I just don't. I don't know if that's just their response um, when an opposing view is presented. Um, but one thing I noticed I've tried to do is talk about how it affects them personally, or here's something that's like that I'm not going to just read in a story. So, for example, on race, I've listened to a lot of hours of different people talk about race. A lot of the more conservative people will highlight how there's still a lot of upward mobility despite there still being prejudice in our country. And I was really interested in hearing about how one of my family members experienced that. And because I think he mentioned something about Trump voters being racist or something like that. But I tried to steer the conversation toward his personal experience, what he um, saw, and it was, and then how because he really has done quite well in our country, but it took 40 years of just working, and it was really interesting to see how he definitely felt like he was discriminated against, and and it was something that I learned from, and also I don't know if I softened his view or um, caused him to question a bit, because I think I did bring up like how not say with Trump, right? Like how not everybody who vote, like people voted for him for different reasons, you know. Um, I think the comments about Mexicans really offended this person, but I did um, try to listen to him and then also try to offer something slightly different than what it seems like he thought. And I found that to be a really great conversation. That was probably a nice highlight of my day. So maybe in person, I might not always comment on someone's story. And you know, the deep state kept me and you from being Facebook friends for a long time. So I wouldn't even see your things because I wasn't your friend, though I thought I was.
That's true. I did too. I
Yeah.
was surprised
So,
to learn that you weren't.
well, now are you really that surprised?
To be honest, no, not really.
So, I mean, so yeah, personally, I think I will be interested in these topics, but I think I try to go personal. Maybe that's because I'm a female and I like relationships.
Sexist.
Well, and females tend to, um, I think, tend to gather in groups when it comes to ideas and thoughts, meaning they'll gravitate towards, um, I don't want to say what's not popular, but more commonly accepted. Um, where, and that's just an observation, where males uh, tend to be, at least in my experience, more more oriented towards debating or question
Disagreeable. Disagreeable.
disagreeable, yeah, disagreeable. By far, all the conversations that I've had, I can't. I mean, I can't really think of any females online. Even, I mean, I've been a part of, like, even recently, but I mean, just going. I'm just thinking now back to the past. I mean, there's been so many online, you know, blogs I've been a part of, research, projects that I've done with certain people on topics, and um, gosh, I'm I'm scratching my head here trying to think of the times when there was a female kind of active in those groups, or part of those groups, and it's not because they were excluded, but I think because I don't really gravitate towards those things. Not That's not a bad thing. I mean, it's just seems like kind of the way things go. That's kind of true in my experience in the church and stuff. I mean, when I get into discussions about theological, you know, topics, or debate certain doctrines in the church, by far those conversations were kind of male oriented. I could be wrong.
Maybe there's a
It's just
glass
an experience.
maybe
That's
there's
just
a
an
glass
experience.
ceiling that's you
But
can't see.
yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I just haven't seen. I haven't personally seen or experienced um too many females, when it comes to the debate or the philosophy world or discussions about politics. I haven't seen a whole lot of women engaging in that. But that's, again, I don't think it's because they're not capable. I mean, I do know there's over the years there's been a few females, friends and things that I've known that are very articulate. Um,
Any of them
yeah.
have a name starting with D,
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. I would.
like Delane or
Yeah.
oh, I don't know. Can you think of any names?
I would definitely
Dorcas.
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 I would definitely put uh the big D, deep state, deep state Dana. I did put deep
Oh,
state Dana into the
oh,
category of a rare,
oh,
rare.
sexist. Here comes a sexist
Yeah,
remark.
here it comes. Here it comes. Gosh darn it! I didn't want to do it, but into but here again, prove me wrong. I mean, my goodness, um, prove me wrong. But I would say, yeah, Dana, falls into the category of the sort of rare exception of somebody willing to have a conversation about politics and kind of debate through some things and ask some questions, which is, I find it refreshing because I do think, again, I don't think it has anything to do with being a female, because I think females and women are very articulate, super intuitive, and super smart. They have a lot to offer, but for whatever reason, don't necessarily engage in those things for whatever their reasons are.
Well, I think because, well, thank you. I guess that's very nice of you. I will take that as a compliment. This show is so positive. It's a positive place right here. I think maybe females want to still see their family members and friends, possibly. Maybe that's it. They know what these turn into.
And are you saying that males are more inclined to like write people off and say, well, I guess it's just not working out?
Well, let me think. You know what? Gosh. Because, sometimes you do have like one conversation and someone never talks to you again. And I've had that happen to me. And not just by females, though, by males too.
Yeah, so no, I've had that too.
Maybe that's part of it, because either people know that's how, or females maybe, or more sensitive people know that that's how they respond, and then they want to keep the peace. I don't know, or like maybe they're just I mean, Jeff, I think we mentioned this on the show where Jeff asked somebody in our life about some of these meaning of life questions, and they just said when pressed, they just said they didn't like to think about that type of stuff.
Oh, that they didn't. I don't know if they said they didn't like.
Okay, they just didn't, though. They just didn't. Like, that's
female,
but I don't know, Jeff, have you had that response from a male?
I haven't asked the question a lot.
Like that?
Well, I have. I've had that response from males too. Plenty of males. And I would say, I'll say this, I've had that response from more males than females, and not because females or males, or excuse me, males are more inclined toward that response, but just because in the spirit of engagement, when you look at just the numbers of people that I've engaged with during these topics, by far it's been more males, and I've had plenty of males kind of say those same things, not verbatim, but very close, that they're not interested in those things. They don't really think about it. Not important to them. Kind of waste time. Blah, blah, blah. All that stuff.
Go Dodgers.
Go Dodgers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's it's interesting. I haven't been in one of these settings in a long time, but I think it would be interesting for you to see, like a fly on the wall, what happens in an all women Bible study where people are supposed to share their interpretations of scripture. That was a hard time for me, I think, because some of the comments I thought were like really off the wall, or not really sticking to careful interpretation. And, maybe I was interpreting things incorrectly too. I mean, this was years ago, but I would, I wasn't confrontational enough to actually contradict somebody's statement. So that's me, right? I'm part of the problem, but like nobody would. Like, it'd be a room full of women with some, with at least one who was considered the leader. And that's interesting. So I wonder how different maybe I guess I know how different an all male study could be, because I would participate in our Bible studies, which were mostly male, who would share. And I think you guys would contradict each other. I think the disagreeableness has a real good place in thinking, just trying to get at the truth. And probably the don't confront method is good just for maintaining some relationships. I mean, maybe not everything has to be called out.
Well, in
Maybe.
the male dominant discussion arena that I've been a part of, gosh, I've been in some very heated discussions where people are extremely disagreeable.
Did anybody ever rip their shirt?
No, but very close to it. I'll be honest.
Their own shirt.
Yeah, rip their own shirt.
Very close. Very close.
That was probably. Oh, go.
A male who was so frustrated by what was taking place in a Bible study that they tore their sweater.
It was because of Rick Warren.
No joke? No joke?
Yeah, no joke. But I think they were. If I were to try to describe what was going on there, I think it was a willful action emulating the practice in scripture of tearing a garment. So while it wasn't a joke, I think it was done in a way that was kind of like, this is terrible, I'm going to tear my garment, because that's what they do in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, I think it was in response to 40 Days for Life. I mean, no, 40 Days of Purpose.
40 Days of Purpose.
Like the video series. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that disagreeableness and discernment is really important in terms of church. I mean, wow, like there's a lot of ideas that are bad if you're taking the approach that the New Testament is supposed to be followed closely and not added upon. So I'm glad for the disagreeableness. I'm glad for the shirt terrors and all that.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad thing. I don't think people having passion or being disagreeable is a problem at all. I find that more encouraging than anything. The problem I run into most of the time is it gets to the point where they just don't want to talk anymore. They're just done. They're done with the conversation, just period. Can anybody hear the feedback?
That's Dana's AI showing. Dana's AI is showing.
Oh, that's why I'm talking with you guys, because I'm really a robot.
Yeah, I think your circuits are coming out.
The is that like
I think
NPC kind of stuff?
I don't know what NPC is, but Dana might be a robot is all I'm saying. I'm not saying she is, but you know. That crunchiness was definitely coming from her.
Oh.
Now we didn't get into. I know you guys are all having fun, talking and stuff. That's crunchy Dana then. But we didn't get into some other reasons that I don't engage by myself, apart from.
Because you want people to notice you and say like, "What's wrong? Are you okay, Jeff? You're so quiet."
Reverse psychology kind of stuff.
Did I hurt your feelings, Jeff?
But that's not it. The depression part of me though, I did talk about it on this program, this amazing program, where by the way I checked, we had 2 listeners last week.
It was Ron.
So the deep state says.
Well, eventually we're going to put it on a podcasting platform, and that's when it's going to be lit.
We might double our numbers, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Triple.
So another one is something I think I discussed. I believe I did express my depression about this on this program, about how the whole axiomatic reasoning thing and that how my observation of what mathematics did over 2,000 years was a long and tedious, difficult task to find to find out what was wrong and what was right, and to kind of weed it all out and come up to a agreed upon approach to something as simple as mathematics. And I think a lot of these conversations we're having are pretty complex, and so to have a really good conversation that has progress in it, I believe can happen, but it has to be done carefully and thoughtfully. And so, whether it's conversations with others or what I hear on the media, I just don't feel like we're getting even close to progress. Although I don't deny progress is occurring at some level, I just feel like so much of it is confusion and distraction and disingenuousness. It's just hard to step into it and deal with all the mess, for me at least.
Can I give you a perfect example?
Well, I got one for you after that.
All right. Yeah. No, yeah, no, and but here, and I want to hear it. I mean, really quick. I mean, you talked about, you know, our friend, our funny friend, um, you know, did a little audio clip,
The other
15,
listener,
yeah,
listener
the
number
other,
two.
yeah, listener did an audio clip of, of the show. And I thought, personally, I thought it was hilarious.
Daniel,
I thought
you
it was,
got to fix your thing. Maybe you can put it to turn it off speakerphone,
yeah,
or
it is
put
quite
it on
loud.
speakerphone. Whatever you have it on, you should switch it to the other one.
It is quite loud. But I did hear the whole thing, and I thought it was hilarious. I really thought, like, number one, he did a good job. He's, and as he always is, pretty funny. Um, but again, I mean, it didn't really address and I wasn't surprised, but although it was funny, it didn't really address the topic. It didn't get into to anything. And that's the typical kind of like dismissal that I run into. It's like somebody dismissing, what I feel like are valid points, and there is no resolving or getting to the bottom line of some of this stuff, which you can. I think you can. It's not like you can't. You can. It's just that there's this seems to be this unwillingness to ask questions, this unwillingness to kind of process through, talk through stuff, and seems to be very intentional. I mean, if I go back to our funny friend, I'd find no reason why he can't engage, why he can't be serious about the topics, why he can't be straightforward and um, not play those particular kind of games. But whatever. I mean, it's not like it's not funny. I get what he's doing. It is funny, but it's really distracts from the overall kind of conversation, which that's an extreme. That's an extreme kind of example of the more common experience I have with these conversations that people just don't seem to be interested in, period.
And I do find that I can, with that particular person, have a good conversation. But
That's shocking.
there are some things to wade through, in my opinion, which gets back to what I'm talking about. Is there's just a lot of confusion, and this person in particular, maybe they do it thoughtlessly. I don't know. They'll post articles, and then maybe I'm just gullible or something. I'll actually start reading them, and then, like you pointed out earlier, and Dana, I'll start to engage when somebody sends something, and then I'll find it to be ridiculous or missing something or overlooking some obvious thing, and then I'll start engaging on it, and then we'll just move on to another article, and the same thing will happen, and move on to another article, and it's sort of, I don't know, it's I don't even know what I'm doing sometimes when I'm in these conversations. Like, are we really making any progress, or is this like, like someone shooting a shotgun and hoping something hits?
Well, that's the thing. You can make progress. You can make progress if you're dedicated to it. Because I see people and hear people do it all the time. The problem is you have to have the other party willing to engage, and when they're not, it's pretty clear. Which I, to be quite honest, I find it hard to believe that those things aren't intentional. I find it hard to believe that somebody's just so dysfunctional and so distracted that they're completely unable to have a conversation.
Yeah, and I wouldn't characterize our friend Jim that way exactly, but I would say he is a mixed bag. Sometimes he's very normal to talk to. Other times he's off the charts crazy. I mean, when he's
But
calling
he's
Jim
lovable. But he's lovable.
he is lovable, yes. Like that video, I mean that thing he made in response to us. That was lovable. Do I get my turn now?
Yes.
I'll take your silence.
Please,
Have at it.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yes.
So I was driving. I drove my car today instead of riding my bike, killing the environment. And on NPR, they were discussing the House's passage of some bill to undo Trump's declaring of an emergency or something like this. And they had a Republican guy on there, and it was classic NPR nailing, drilling into him question after question, not giving him a breath. It was exactly what I'm talking about when they have a Republican person on there. Now they also do it with Democrats to a degree, but it just seems you can see the nature of it is so much stronger against the Republican. And while they were talking to him, he was basically his argument was there is an emergency down there, and I'm not going to pass a resolution that says there isn't an emergency. And he was talking about how he went down there. He said he had an open mind, and so he went down there, and he said it is an emergency. And he said nobody talks about the human trafficking side of it enough. But there's human trafficking going on. There's tons of drugs going on, and so he's saying different things. And I have a little image here from NPR, if you can see it. It's GOP Representative Adam Kinzinger on why he's behind Trump's national emergency. So that's on the screen here, and Ari's asking him questions, and he's responding. And what he says in one part I find very interesting. I think it's a good example. And that is when he starts talking about drugs. Sorry for the pause here.
No, that's fine. I can see it. I'm following.
Okay, he says, well, I deployed to the border. I'm a National Guard pilot. I did 2 weeks of service. My unit was actually down there for 2 months, and as reservists, we got out and helped them for a couple of weeks and went down and actually flew the mission. And I went down neutral. I have never been afraid to call the president out when I thought he was wrong. But what I saw there, a significant amount of drugs coming over the border and human trafficking. It really would break my heart to see. And he got interrupted by Shapiro, NPR guy. Though if I could pause you, the numbers show that the majority of drugs pass through the checkpoints. And then he says what I've said before, yeah, because they can detect them. Shapiro then, they're talking crosstalk there. A wall wouldn't make a significant difference. And he says, yeah, they can detect them through checkpoints. So that's why they confiscate them. That's where they can determine the amount of drugs coming through. when you have drugs coming over a porous border wall and you can't detect it, it's kind of hard to tell. Now, and he goes on to say, I can tell you that the number of people that we intercepted, they did either drop bundles, right, of drugs, in which case they run and Border Patrol goes after them and try to retrieve the bundle, or they have drugs on them. One of my crews actually picked up somebody with 70 pounds of meth, and we were just pretty smart. I'm sorry, just a pretty small part of it. But now Shapiro says, now the human trafficking is the other big thing that I don't think people talk enough about. And then he says, your colleagues who opposed the emergency declaration say Congress was fully aware. But anyways, there's this dialogue going on, right? Now, you know how have you heard that where they talk about the majority of the drugs are coming through the ports of entry?
I have not heard that specifically, but
Maybe it's an
I mean,
NPR thing, but they keep pointing it out. They say this is dumb because the majority of drugs come through ports of entry. And
yeah,
this may seem like it doesn't matter to anybody out there, but what he said is the obvious response to that is, well, how do you know, a thousand, a few thousand miles of border, how do you know how much drugs are coming through the places where there's no wall? The
that's right.
assumption is that we catch every person coming through, right?
Yeah,
And then this idea that you're going to compare that to an airport, which is a port of entry, an airport or a border crossing where they're actually checking people. And then you're going to say that most of the drugs are coming through the airports and the ports of entry, right? The container places and stuff like this.
correct.
While you're comparing, it's like comparing apples and oranges. That's the first problem, right?
Yep.
But then let me go to the drug enforcement part, and I have some quizzes for you guys. How many pounds of drugs are coming through? Let's pick a high year. How many pounds of drugs are they catching coming through per day? What do you guys think?
Average
On a high year, let's see. The
on a
highest
high.
year recently was, I'm looking at the charts here. 2012 was a high year.
All right.
So
So
how many per day? How many pounds of cocaine, heroin, marijuana, methamphetamine, and fentanyl do they confiscate per day? Dana, go ahead.
1,500.
Ron,
10 tons.
6,681 pounds of drugs confiscated per day. I would say that might be a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And so people like to talk about whether this is an emergency or not and so forth. But I just think if you wrap your mind around the numbers of what's coming on at our ports of entry and who knows what's going on where there's no border, and you try to wrap your mind around what's happening, that's a real conversation, which good luck for having actual people talk about the actual numbers in a real way and what the heck we're going to do about it, if anything.
Right. Right.
When I say
Wait,
good
are
luck,
you,
that's where I
Mr.
get frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
I get frustrated because good luck, who's talking about the details? Now, they have on the same U.S. Border Patrol site the gang arrests and everything. I mean, gang affiliation enforcement. On a high year, they had 1,000 gang affiliated people intercepted, right? So that's, about 3 per day. And then, of course, remember MS-13 on average, just recently, it's up to one MS-13 person, known gang affiliation per day, is coming into the country illegally.
Well, and let me ask
And that's
because this
intercepted.
right, right. So why here I guess my question immediately is because that's an observation I am well aware of because I've made the same observation that you cannot have a discussion about the details, and I guess why I mean those are important details. That's a pretty important when you talk about when somebody says um, they start talking about immigration problems and they pretend like those statistics aren't true. Why? What's the purpose of that?
Also, they begin to bring up race as though race has something to do with it. Now, granted, there are racists, and I think I've been exposed to a lot of examples of people who are anti, not illegal things, but actually they really do tie in race to it. And so you have to accept that there are people who think of this as Mexicans or something like that, or they think that people are brown people. So that element does exist. You can't, I don't know, maybe you can deny it. I don't know. But I wouldn't be able to deny it because I've seen too many examples of people who associate these numbers with race. And I think that is a legitimate problem, but that's another pitfall, right? You can't talk about these numbers without bringing up the fact that there's crappy people in the world. We don't need to focus on those crappy people. So forget the crappy racists for a second and just talk about the numbers. How hard I find it is to just talk about the numbers and what do we care about this? And if so, if we do care about this, what are we going to do about this? And how about the logical fact that if the border is wide open in certain areas, and there's obviously all these problems coming on at the ports of entry, it seems pretty obvious that there's going to be a lot of crossing in non-ports of entry since that it's wide open. And so, who's just talking about it matter of factly, not bringing up the race stuff, not getting all into all the weird things I hear everyone always talking about. Just talking about the actual numbers and is it a problem, and if it is a problem, what are we going to do about it? Like, who's just keeping it simple and trying to solve that problem, because that's a hard problem.
Yes, I agree. I don't really hear that conversation happening, to be honest. Very
Isn't it the
very
only
few.
conversation though?
What?
Isn't it the only conversation though?
The only.
I don't
Isn't
know.
that what we're concerned about? Is we have 6,000 pounds on a high year of drugs being confiscated, trying to come into the country per day, trying to become, 3 gang members per day on a high year, trying to, known gang members. The amount of people. Let's talk about the amount of people. They have classified the number of people into categories. So I can read that to you too. Arrest of individuals with criminal convictions or those wanted by law enforcement. So how many people are arrested who are individuals with criminal convictions or those wanted by law enforcement at our borders and ports of entry per day on a high
Probably
year?
probably quite a few.
Here we go. Per day, what do you think?
I'm gonna say 100.
35.
Okay, still a large number. Not quite 100, but still a large number.
So,
Do you feel? So let me ask you this: do you feel that the numbers actually do
I lied.
justify
I'm sorry. I lied.
what?
It's that's the number of criminal aliens encountered.
Okay. What? So what's
That's
the
the number
answer
of, it
to?
says here, criminal aliens refers to aliens who have been convicted of crime, whether in the United States or abroad, so long as the conviction is for the conduct which is deemed criminal by the United States. Criminal aliens encountered at ports of entry are inadmissible absent extenuating circumstances and represent a subset of total UFO in admissions. U.S. Border Patrol arrests of criminal aliens are a subset of total apprehensions. So this is a subset of total apprehensions. The actual number, I guess, is different. I'd have to read a little bit here. But anyways, you were going to say something.
No, I'm listening to the buzz. I
Yes, that's
was
Dana. She is buzzing.
Yeah. Let me ask you, and so it gets worse. Let me ask you, what If you were going to at this point, right, talk about the numbers and the importance of the numbers, what would be your what would be your bottom line on that? Do you feel like the numbers are indeed an important discussion, and that they should be a factor in the discussion, and that it might actually justify the terminology emergency?
That would be what would be nice to hear people discuss, because when you look at the numbers, you could come to the determination that it's an emergency, but I'm saying that that's where the conversation is at. What the heck are people talking about? When you hear people talking, it feels like you don't even know what they're talking about anymore.
Yeah,
Daniel, can you
no.
turn off your either mute yourself or turn it off speakerphone or put it to a different. I don't know what you're doing. All we hear is a loud,
I
high
feel like
pitched.
you don't like me. Do you not like me? You seem very combative and you're hurting my feelings.
And we all know
Can
feelings.
you validate me, please?
You're talking clear now. I can't hear any feedback. Whatever you're doing right this moment is perfect.
Well, maybe it's not me.
Um, I I would think that the numbers are an important piece of the conversation, a major part of the conversation. What people are talking about, to be quite honest, I've brought it over and over again. I don't know. Now, you've continuously asked me, Jeff, when it comes to the topic of racism. You've said over and over again, which our funny friend pointed out, but you've said or you've asked over and over again, well, you do believe actual racism is a problem, right? And when I'm not cut off and not taken out of context, I say yes, of course. But the problem is, I don't see those numbers as significant as what you're pointing out. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm just saying, look, I'll give you a for instance. So recently, with the whole media thing going on with this actor Jesse, right? Smollett, whatever his name is, Smollett, whatever, however you pronounce his name. But whatever, I heard a couple people saying that because of what he did, it takes away from the more important discussion, and the more important discussion is that those kinds of crimes, the hate crimes, are on the rise. I heard that a couple times, but I heard that a couple times without any of what you're doing, Jeff. All I've heard is that those numbers are on the rise, and they have not once qualified it and actually been able to point it out and say, here's why we're making that claim. You, on the other hand, are pointing out some real numbers. So yes, I agree. I see it happening a lot, more specifically with these recent events and topics and conversations. It's quite the fuzzy deep state stuff going on.
Foiled again.
Every single time, something.
Oh man.
So do you are you with me? Are you understanding what I'm saying, or do you agree? Do you not agree? Or are you
What
making the
I'm
same?
kind of doing is stepping back and saying I'm frustrated by all of it. The idea that um, it's I think it's called hasty generalizations. These sweeping sort of remarks, like hate crimes are up and like it's Trump's fault or something like this. And then all the details that go into hate crimes, like if you look into, I'm looking at the screen right now. An actual comparison would need to compare what exactly went up because there's lots of different types of hate crimes and against what races, for example. I mean, there's hate crimes against so-called white people. Are they talking about those going up?
Well, yeah, no, that's exactly. Are they?
I don't know because that's the thing. Like I'm looking at this page here, and of the 6,370 known offenders, 50% were white, so-called white. 20% were black or African American.
Okay, and but I mean, what does that mean? Like, what are they kind of crimes are they talking about?
Well, 60% are against persons, 36% against property, 2.8% against society, whatever that means. This is from the FBI hate crime statistics. But I'm just saying, Ron, like that when they say those numbers, they are also, if they're going to generalize, they have to also be admitting that there's more, that the hate crimes against white people are increasing.
Yeah, I would agree.
But they're not saying, that's the
No.
thing. It's all a messed up narrative. It's just frustrating. People overgeneralize. They don't look at the specifics. And as I've said, in my humble opinion, the world's kind of complex, and so you can't just say these things. Unfortunately, when you say because of Trump, hate crimes are increasing, you're including in that statement is that more white people are being attacked, and there you're blaming that on Trump. And some people say, yeah, of course it's his fault that white people are being attacked. And it's getting really crazy at that point. Like, what are you saying exactly? I mean, you're saying that Jewish people, because that's a major, category of hate crimes, is against Jewish people. You're saying that Jewish people are now being attacked more because of Trump?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have somebody that was on here and was saying stuff like that. Not in those exact words, but they were essentially blaming a lot of what's going on Trump supporters, as they want to call them, which I don't even know what that means. I mean, does that mean just if you voted for him? Does it? Yes, it's a lot more complex than they're making it out to be. I mean, I don't know. Again, take our friend for instance. I don't know why it's so hard to discuss that with him and people of that mindset, because that seems to be the majority. If you bring these things up, if you talk about the numbers, if you talk about the actual discussion, what's driving the numbers. Um, for instance, I mean, with the whole false hate crime thing that took place, the actor Chicago. I mean, one of the things that early on people were pointing out was the unlikely event that white people in that neighborhood in Chicago at 2 o'clock in the morning, and sub or freezing temperatures, below freezing temperatures, are doing those kinds of things. Because if you take the numbers of crimes in Chicago, by far, they're committed. I know you don't like the word, Jeff, but most of the shootings that occur are black people shooting black people. And if you don't like that, African Americans shooting African Americans. And if you don't like that, richly pigmented people shooting richly pigmented people. So however you want to approach that, that's the reality of the numbers. But yet that's completely absent from most of the discussions. Not all of them.
Well, I actually don't want to talk about that because I don't know if I have the same. I don't like when people say those kinds of things because to me, the underlying message in there's something racist in there.
Well, here's the problem though. Here's
And
the problem.
I think the
You
underlying
you
thing
wouldn't
is
say, you
you're
wouldn't.
trying to compare. You start with somebody makes a racist statement, and then you try to come back with a racist statement.
No, that's not. But here's the problem with that. Here's the problem with that. Here's why I feel like even approaching the conversation like that seems to be problematic for me. And here's just one example. You take, cartel violence at the border. We talk about that one piece. Who's committing those crimes? Who's in the cartel? Who are they talking about? What's happening? Is it white people down there doing that? Is it black people down there doing that? Is it American Indians down there doing that? Is it Asians down there doing that? No, it's not. It's brown people. It's Mexican people that are part of those organizations or that geographic location that happen to be primarily Mexican. And so that's you're that's not a racist statement. That's just reality. There's nothing racist about it. It's the
It is racist,
facts.
and here's
No,
why:
it's not.
you're buying into the whole racist narrative. So rather than say that was dumb or defeating whatever the fact was in front of you, you just bring up more race. And when you start bringing in race yourself, which is what you're doing, you're participating in sort of this racist conversation. Because
Well, I just, if I'm understanding you correctly, if we were going to talk about the murder rate in like a really lightly pigmented state, like I guess Idaho, wouldn't that be by largely white people?
Right.
And would you have a problem with saying, in Idaho, 90% of the murders are caused by white people?
Nope.
Would you
Nope.
talk
We're
the same
not.
way about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
what would be the point, though? Like,
And if
why
you
would
can,
you bring up the obvious?
I
well,
think the point you're trying to make is that just like you, if we were focusing on the murder rate in Boise, Idaho, and it would be white white people mostly doing the murders, that like you don't feel touchy about that, right? If some people talk about that issue, you being a self-identified white person, and like, do you feel like when the Chicago murder rate is discussed or the Mexican border crime problem is discussed, that it's more touchy when people mention skin color, where it shouldn't be, like in the Boise situation? Is that what you're trying to say
You're talking to me or him?
to Ron?
well, I'll put it to you this way. When the CNN anchor Don Lemon said that, the I forget his exact words, but basically saying that, most terrorist acts are because of white people that have been radicalized. That was a pretty widely accepted statement. I didn't hear too many people questioning that. And people were quite okay with him saying that. As a matter of fact, I think, again, like I'm doing right now, I'm pointing out something in Chicago, or I'm pointing out something at the border. Jeff has a very serious problem with that, but he doesn't really seem to have a problem with Don Lemon making his statements. He doesn't consider that racist, although that would fall into racism according to what I think he's saying.
No, I said it was racism, and you bringing up race just continues the racism conversation. And I'm just saying it'd be nice to, when somebody says something racist, to deal with that rather than saying bringing up more race words, which just brings in more things. And in many cases, it's as meaningless as what Dana pointed out. If there's a bunch of so-called white people living in a city and they're killing each other, you're going to say white. Looks like most crime is white on white crime, and it just that's racism. It's just you're just jumping right into the fray of racist words and racist nut stuff. And I'm saying it's better just to not jump in and participate in categorizing people and then playing those games. It's just
Well, that's like labeling things hate crime.
no racism. It's race. So people made up these things. You're not white, and I'm not white, and there's not black people, and all this stuff is just made up mumbo jumbo. And
Yes.
we're still in the years 2019. We're still talking about on NPR. They had a so-called black person talking about the black Oscar awards, I guess, and discussing different things about it. And I get that it's a real thing because in cultures we create things and then they become real. I get that part. And I get that there's actually a real problem with racism against, quote, black people, end quote, because people, I see it all the time. People are still racist. I get that too. But I would hope we can move on at some point from this created category of people and other created categories of people, and that there's different things about these people and those people and so forth. It'd be just so nice. But when you just keep participating in it, you just keep the weirdness going.
So would you be for just all the labels just to stop tomorrow? Would that make you
Yeah, it'd
happy?
be
Like you couldn't
absolutely
refer to somebody based on their skin tone in legal documents and in scholarships and quotas in the media. Like, what if you
absolutely
just couldn't
not
use those
illegal. I
words
don't believe
anymore?
in legislating it, but
No,
absolutely,
no,
yeah.
but like, well, I'm just as a thought experiment. Like, you think that would force us to then look at some of these problems in different ways, like maybe look more at socioeconomics and things like that.
Correct. Or at least use more obvious terms like European, which just means somebody has their ancestry from Europe.
Well, I think when Ron was talking about the border, he said Mexicans. Is that is
No,
that
I'm
right,
fine
Ron?
with ethnicity.
Well,
Huh?
This is where you're
I said
from.
when you point out the specific problem of the cartel, as they call it, or gangs at the border, um, who are they referring to? Are they referring to African American people at the border that are the gang problems? Or are they referring to white people at the border that are gang problems? Are they referring to Asians or American Indians? No, they're referring to specifically Mexican people.
Well,
I
And
think
it's
that's
and
I
true.
think with but with
statistically speaking, the numbers justify that. And they say, hey, at that particular area, just like in Chicago or just like in Boise, Idaho, or wherever else you want to point out, the numbers, now is that the only factor? Of course not. It's not the only factor, but it is a factor. It's not like, oh, I don't understand the point of ignoring that. I don't understand the point of not being able to point that out. And I'll give you a I I I don't have the numbers in front of me, but somebody did point out that, if you know you take the concentration of like Asians, in the United States, right, and take areas where Asians are, a large part of the population, you don't see those same kind of things happening. Now, like as you pointed out, Jeff, there's probably other things that contribute to that, but not being able to point out that if you say, well, there's a lot of murders happening in Chicago, we're not going to talk about, you know, we're not going to talk about people's skin color because that's race. I don't know. I don't see that as racism. I just see it as part of the equation. I think it's part of the numbers. It's part of
I
the
think, though,
statistics.
do you find it any more meaningful to talk about skin color than to talk about hair color? Like it, like would you say so for the murders in Chicago? Like, would there be how 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 far can you go with the fact that it's done by black haired people? Like beyond just that as a interesting corollary, just an interesting side note. I mean, where else do you go with that? And I think for Jeff's perspective, which I agree with, is that skin color should be as irrelevant as hair color as far as what we make of it or if we want to analyze. So I think that's what Jeff's responding to. It's like, or like, say, eye color. Like, if you want to talk about, hey, there's this really high rate of brown eyed murderers. Um, Beyond just that statement, there's not much to read into or make
Well,
that shouldn't be meaningful. So I think that's what Jeff is maybe responding to, that to bring it
I'd
up
say,
and to go far with it doesn't even make sense.
yeah, I think the Jim, our buddy that we've mentioned a couple times, I think a couple years ago, I got in a discussion with him and somebody else online. I don't remember the exact details, but it was basically pointed out, and then the discussion of Chicago came up, and they said, well, the reason why that you're seeing so much crime in that area is because of the economic conditions um, in Chicago, and that's what's really driving that. And then somebody appropriately pointed out that, well, if you take very similar economic conditions in other areas in the country, and you can see that those same kinds of violent crimes aren't happening, you can't completely associate it with that either. You can't dismiss that fact either. And I want to say it was somewhere in Alabama, but they were saying like the poorest place in the United States, and the poorest place in the United States happened to be a very high concentrate of white people. So by far, the majority that reside in this very poor city in the United States. It's not black people. It's not Mexican people. It's not Indians. It's not Asians. It's white people. And basically they said, so with that said, you still don't see with the economic conditions that are that exist in that area. You're not seeing the violence. You're not seeing that same kind of. And that's true. And again, they had an article. They had a link. And they showed the numbers, and I would say, yeah, that's again a very important piece of the conversation.
Okay. First of all, big deal. Dana shared something with you which you didn't respond to, which I think is so very important.
Well, give it to me again. I'll respond.
It hits the nail on the head. If you told me, blue-eyed people kill the most blue-eyed people, I would be like, okay, now what? Like, what does that have to do with anything?
I don't know.
Like, why do you care that blue-eyed people kill more blue-eyed people?
I don't. But
And then similarly, she brought up, suppose you did a statistic and you found out that, blonde-haired people commit more crimes than black-haired people. Again, what would you do with that information, Ron? There's nothing to do with that information.
well, here's the problem. The reason why those things are always brought up is because, like, let's say a shooting happens and it's publicized in the media. And ultimately, there's the typical narrative, it's radicalized, Trump supporters, and come to find out, no, it's really not. It's actually the opposite. And people start getting into the discussion of where violence happens or shooting happens in certain areas of the country. So they start pointing out in the conversations, they start pointing out all these other relatable factors. That's the reason why it gets brought up. Does it matter? No, I no, it doesn't. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but it's still a piece of the puzzle.
No, I don't think it is a piece of the puzzle unless you're. I think this is true. Unless you have some sort of underlying racist kind of idea, it doesn't come into the puzzle. You don't care about their eye color, right? I mean, you would never say any of these things you say about eye color. You'd never say anything of these things that you say about hair color. You would never do it. But when it comes to the pigment of someone's skin, and specifically, not just the pigment, but if the pigment of the skin plus the origin was perhaps not from the European continent, now you care about it. And I'm saying that's because we are racist as a culture, and we need to get away from that because those things are perhaps correlation, Ron, but not causation. And if there's no causation, just correlation, if it's just correlation and that's it, then we don't need to talk about it. It's no different than the fact that there might be some correlating factors between brown eyes or blue eyes or whatever, but who cares about these random details? I shared with my class the other day, here's a good example for you, that the amount of cheese consumption of the United States per capita has gone up at the same rate that the amount of people who get tangled up in their bed sheets and die has increased. So there happens to be a correlation between how much cheese America eats and the amount of people that are tangled up in their bed sheets and die.
Yeah, no,
And, and,
I,
and what you could do is you could say, wow, we better stop consuming cheese. Maybe we should make some laws against consuming cheese. Or you could step back and say, wait a minute, these things might correlate for whatever reason, but perhaps we have some correlation without causation. Maybe the cheese isn't causing the people to get caught up in the bed sheets.
right.
And that's an extreme example, but similarly, can we just ditch race?
Sure, we can ditch
Unless we
race.
think people are different by their races, and unless we want to say that some people are better than others based on their races or have different tendencies based on their races, I don't think race has anything to do with this. And since I don't believe that there's all these idea of races and that somehow when I see somebody I can judge them based on the color of their skin, why do we talk about it?
Well, no, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think it was Denzel Washington, one of the video clips I've seen of him floating around the internet, but he brought up that very thing, and he said the only reason why that's an issue is because people keep bringing it up as an issue. And I agree. I'm not saying that it needs to be the primary focal point of the discussion, because I don't think it needs to be. I think it's deceptive to focus on that. But that's part of the problem with the conversations that we're even talking about. I mean, early on, and it's like you pointed out just the numbers of just the plain statistics, people coming across the border, the drug problems. Forget about the race issue. Forget about that. Somebody could claim that that's primarily Hispanic, Mexican people committing those crimes. It doesn't matter. What matters is it actually is existing. Forget the fact that the primary, you know, primarily, black people, or excuse me, let me rephrase it, black people that are shot in Chicago, and the high statistic, the numbers that are out there. Forget about the fact that black on black crime is the primary culprit. Forget about it. the numbers in itself, just the pure numbers are interesting. Just the pure numbers should be focused on. But with that said, you know, does it does it if you're focusing on the murder statistics in Chicago and you're saying, okay, well, we've got all these different factors in here. Skin color, yeah, no, it's not that big of a deal. It is a factor, but it's not anything that I think, should be, focused on solely. No, not at all. I agree with you. But again, when somebody on CNN says that, most terrorist, acts in America are because of white people that have been radicalized. Wouldn't you agree that that's racism then? I mean, based on what you're saying.
I started by saying when people bring up race, it's good to stop and point out that it's racist, and try to deal with it. Not come back with more racist stuff, but stop and contemplate and think about it and try
Well,
to eradicate it. If it isn't a good example of racism, then we point it out and say that's racist.
well,
Yeah.
and
So
and
I
here's
have
the
a
here's the thing. Here's the thing. By him doing that, by him making that statement, he drives an argument that is irrelevant. Instead of like pointing out specifics and pointing out like, well, here's what the crime data actually says, and here are the events, and here are the things that we can point to. Like, for instance, when they talked about school shootings, and I think you went through the numbers on school shootings a couple weeks ago, maybe not, but I think you went through the numbers on school shootings and what school shootings like, actually consisted of. Like people, a couple of them where people shot themselves in the parking lot of schools, and so they were
yeah, at night.
counted. Yeah, and they were counted as school shootings. Those are the problems with any of these discussions, because people throw out these things and they distract from the actual conversation. That's the problem. And so when somebody gets up on the news and says that all these terrorist acts are because of these radicalized white people, I mean, that drives a conversation where people start going, well, wait a second here. You're blaming everything on white people. What about all the black people in this area, and what about all the Mexicans in this area? That's why people start doing that. It's not because I don't think it's because people just automatically gravitate towards that conversation. It's just because there's influencers that bring up these topics, and they bring them up in a way that cause these discussions. But if you and I were just talking, and we were just talking about numbers, and we didn't bring race into it, you and I could do that very easily, and we could have a good conversation without talking about the race factors in Chicago, or down at the border, or in Alabama, or in Boise, Idaho. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? At the end of the day, those crime statistics exist. There's a lot of other things that go into it, and we can have those discussions. So no, I don't think that race is, but I also don't think, though, that pointing those things out is necessarily racism. I think it's deceptive. That's for sure. I think it's disingenuous to focus on those things solely, and pretend like those are the only factors. But that's a whole nother discussion. It's a whole nother topic.
Daniel was going to say something, and I have something it will pique everybody's interest.
Oh, great. Well, I think when you mentioned Don Lemon's comments, I guess you don't need to follow his lead. And one example that in my my protracted media time. One conversation I did engage in was someone was talking about race in terms of church leadership. And I think I don't think they necessarily said that the lack of colored people in different colors besides white, but they were talking about the lack of um, a more diverse group of people in leadership in the past, may have been due to racism. And so one thing that they're thinking is the way forward is to now consider skin color when you pick a church leader, and trying on purpose to bring in more skin colors because of the past. I guess, it could have been a problem in the past. But, I actually think that it might have been just due to the demographics of where these churches were at. But anyway, let's say, say it was racist in the past. They actually had a specific idea that they did not want dark-skinned people in church leadership. I don't think the proper response is to say now we're going to make an extra special effort to include people and consider their skin color and consider it a plus if they're brown skinned. And I don't think that's the right response. Like, I really don't. I think you should say that past way of thinking about people was wrong. And now in 2019, we should never bar somebody from being in leadership because of their skin color. But also, I don't think you should have some type of affirmative action-ish program. Like, I think you should pick the best leader and not think about skin color. Like, really not think about it. And I think continuing in the terms that were set in the past is not good. So whether it's Don Lemon who sets the racist terms, like, or, in this situation, it was the church leadership of the past. Like, we don't have to continue playing the game. Like, you just stop. You view it as just an irrelevant factor, and you try not to see it as something important.
Yeah.
I think that's really the way forward. So, like, say with the Chicago crime statistics, what if you talk? I mean, I guess from what I've read in the past, they do have a horrifically high homicide rate among the young men. And since we all, I think, agree that it's not due to skin color, that skin color doesn't make somebody more murderous or whatever, right? That's just an irrelevant factor.
Well,
I think you would talk about the culture. Okay, so what is it about this culture that is producing, like, what are the problems that we can, or they can, right? It's Chicago, right? That they can take. What are the steps they can take to improve that area? Or again, I think it's largely just, culture, right? Like, values, family dynamics, opportunities, and make it so that there's not such a high murder rate. And you don't even have to talk about skin color or emphasize that it's black on black or whatever. Just
you don't. But I think an effective way. I think an effective way to point out, though, when somebody's talking about those things, an effective way to point out the importance of not focusing on those issues is to simply look at other areas where there's a high concentration of African American, Black people, or in Jeff's world, highly pigmented people, where there's high concentration,
richly pigmented,
poorly and richly pigmented people, but in areas where there's a high concentration of richly pigmented people, where those things don't exist, that crime level doesn't exist, because there's plenty of those examples as well. So when somebody, is focused on, well, look at Chicago and it's all black on black, and it's like, well, yeah, but we know that that's not the only factor in this conversation, because we can look at other areas in the country where there's a high concentration of black people in areas, and those things don't exist. As a matter of fact, the opposite exists. So there's a lot of things that obviously play into it, and the actual conversations are important.
Well, I could let me think.
What do you think
I
about? What
guess
do you
I
think
guess I
about?
just
What do you
feel
think
like
about?
it's what.
What do you
Well,
think about? Go
can I
ahead.
just respond to one thing
Yeah,
first?
yeah.
I guess I feel like as a person, it's I don't even think it's necessary to go find a group of people with the same skin tone who don't have those problems to show that it's not based on skin tone. I think we should all just assume and be happy to not need it to be proven that it's not based on skin tone. And I could see how it'd feel like demeaning, because I'm trying to think, like, so me personally, if I was having a problem with my partner and I needed to improve my response in some way, I wasn't behaving very well. For somebody to go say, okay, well, let me think, I need to find a Mexican counterpart. So I'm going to go find a Mexican counterpart to help Dana with her problems. I'm going to find a Mexican housewife in Texas who has the same challenge. And then so I'm going to be able to show her that Mexican housewives can overcome this. I just think, like, don't do that. Like, just tell me how to be better. I don't need you to show me some ethnic, this someone with my same skin tone to prove to me. Like, it again, I guess I'm just repeating. It's just irrelevant. Like, my skin tone doesn't matter with this problem. Like, I just need to change my behaviors or improve. You don't need to find a control group of whatever. So I guess I could see how maybe I just don't think you can win to continue to highlight skin color as any like, it should, unless there's a very proven prejudicial issue, like someone is being prejudiced on purpose and it's very clear. I really think we shouldn't keep bringing up. I just don't see how that's going to move us forward.
Well, so, it's not. You're right. It's not. And but think about something for a minute. You, I, Jeff, we could right at this point move on to a discussion and say, okay, because of the conversation that we just had, and because we all agree that that shouldn't be a factor, it shouldn't be part of the discussion, shouldn't be something that we focus on. We could actually focus on the numbers. Somebody could bring up the numbers and have a discussion. And we've come to this somewhat of a conclusion or consensus that it's probably not, race and color, people's skin probably isn't that important of an area to focus on when we're having this discussion. And so here's what I'm saying, because I agree with you and I agree with Jeff that it shouldn't be really part of the discussion, but it also sometimes takes having the discussion about that to be able to move forward. So, like I said, the only reason I brought up, being able to point out other concentrations of skin colors in certain areas, the only reason I brought that up is because when somebody's talking about it, I think the way to combat that, or the way to bring another viewpoint, is to point out that, well, you say that, but look at this. And so hopefully somebody can come and say, yeah, you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. That's true. I'll give you for another scenario. This happened. I hear this discussion a lot, and this discussion about this idea that Native Americans before the white people lived in this like paradise kind of scenario, and they weren't having battles and they weren't taking over people, and it was the white people that came in and did all this. And that's just not true. But it takes having that discussion and pointing certain things out to bring, the discussion to a place where you go, yeah, you know what, you're right. White people isn't a factor in, these war scenarios, or, these violent, acquisitions of land and peoples and blah, blah, blah. Not the only factor. White people aren't the only culprits in it. And therefore, since, it's meaningless to have, and to bring that up, let's talk about what could be the real issues. You see what I'm saying? And why it's important to kind of, get to a place where you can have a discussion without bringing up race.
Yeah, and I think though when you started and you brought up the issue where people bring up economics, right? That it was that low socioeconomics is what is breeding all the violence. But then, maybe this is just helpful to know how sensitive this topic is. But when you go and then you choose as your contrast group a group of poor, and you highlight the fact that they're white, you're it's very easy for someone to hear that and think that you are saying it's because of their skin color in Chicago that they're having the very high murder rate, because you use as a contrast group the white people who aren't killing each other and that number. And even if that's not your intention, it's going to be very easily read that way. So maybe that's, I don't know if that, and maybe you actually mean the opposite. I think from what I'm hearing is you mean the opposite point. You mean to say,
I think here's what
does that make sense though? How someone will hear you and think you're highlighting this white group of poor people because you're showing that this is a skin color issue.
No, and so because I could do the same thing. I could very easily. The only reason I brought up that is because that was part of that particular discussion, and that was a real statistic that somebody brought up. But as I've thought through it over the years, I could easily say the same thing about Asians, or different Hispanic groups, different African American groups, Indians. There's all sorts of categories you can get. It's not just white. I mean, there's you can throw in any. I just brought up white because that was the thing. I think here's something that's being pointed out though that I think is very important. Is the very highly sensitive nature of talking about white people, period. I mean, well, let's face it, that's a pretty big issue for people, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. I mean, you're saying, because I brought up the example of white people, that that can be an issue, and I would say, yeah, you're probably right, but if I had brought up Asians, nobody would have batted an eye over that.
Yeah, and maybe
Hispanics, nobody would have batted an eye over that. I mean, that wouldn't have been a factor. But the fact that I brought up white people, that was an issue.
Yeah, and probably the most helpful thing to do is just not bring up the skin tone at all. And I mean, when you go and have these discussions, that maybe that's a helpful tip. So say you are talking about low socioeconomic. If you can just point to another region of the country that has, or several regions that have low socioeconomic situations, and they have a much lower crime rate, perhaps because this issue is so volatile, and because there's people who, like, a friend of mine who just mentioned she's still getting called the N-word, like, walking down the street randomly. Like, people are coming to this discussion with a lot of real racist things that have been done against them. And maybe that's one way to try to get your point heard without causing unnecessary, like, it's like a landmine. Like,
Yeah.
without setting
Yeah.
off unnecessary landmines. I realized too when I talk with one of my relatives, the things like he is looking at the same, like I could be in the same situation as he is. And maybe I'm also just a more gracious person as far as like I give people the benefit of the doubt. Even if they say something rude, I try to think about it different ways. Like maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I'm misinterpreting. But with some of the things this person mentioned, I realize, oh, he's coming at the same social situations that I'm in with all of his baggage, like of being treated badly in the past and all this. And so, even something that is innocuous, like something that's innocent, something that's not even meant to be offensive, like he just takes it the wrong way. And um, for this topic, that's helpful to know too. I think leaving skin tone out permanently is the best way forward, no matter what. But just realizing how sensitive it is,
Well, let me ask you.
it's
Let me
like a
ask you.
smart tactic too. It's a
Let me.
smart, best
Let me.
tactic.
Yeah. No, I don't. I don't disagree. But let me ask you something. With that said, take take the guy that you're referring to, and take the discussion about the grievances that he's experienced over the years. Um, would he, in his discussion, would he be able to leave out skin color?
Would he, like, if we were to talk about skin color, would he be able to not use those words and try to
No,
look at the same topics from a different perspective?
no. Let's say the grievances that he's personally experienced, right? That he's talked about. That you said, yeah, you've acknowledged, right? That you said I don't know who he is, but it doesn't matter. He's had these experiences, and in those experiences, would he be able to leave out skin color? Would that not be a factor for him?
Do you mean in his past experiences?
Yeah,
Would
or
he?
even going forward, some of his beef right now, whatever his beef is, right? Is skin color a factor in that?
Um. Well, yeah. Are you saying that could he be oversensitive to things that really aren't based on skin color, but he's interpreting them as a skin color issue?
Well, I'm saying, based on how you would desire to have and go forward in these conversations, right? If you were talking to him, would you be able to tell him specifically, yeah, what you've experienced really has nothing to do with skin color. That's not a factor. What you experience is just
Or
a,
or even to say, hey, let's stop talking about these people as white people and start talking about them as just people. That would probably be a
yeah,
challenge for him.
yeah, that's what I'm
Too. So I'd
saying.
say that he's not thinking in a race blind way at all. Um, and I do think that
But would you be able to say, hey, let's not talk about their skin color. Let's just talk about, them as people and what they did.
well, in I think I had tried to, like when I said, I think I said something about, this maybe reasons why people voted for Trump. I mean, maybe that was part of it. I was trying to humanize the white people. Um,
Jeff?
and and that's not, I don't think that's a good place for him to be in. And maybe that would be a future discussion one day. Like yeah, I actually realized, oh, like he thinks about them more as white people than I do. Like, and so for all sides, I think there should be improvement. I do agree. I don't often use the richly pigmented label. Maybe sometimes. I just think leaving out the pigment though is best for everybody. Like not pretending the issue doesn't exist, but I think it's made there's too much made of it um rather than too little. So
Hey, Jeff.
I'm
oh,
here.
Would you say, I believe we've talked about it quite a bit, but you've mentioned some of your own experiences with racism. Would you be able to leave out skin color in that conversation?
My stance for quite a while has been that racism is real. It's affecting people on a daily basis, and so you can't ignore that, but you don't want to be a participant in it. So you can't ignore the experiences of others. You have to acknowledge that there's a crappy leftovers and still surviving racism, and but on a personal level, ignore it absolutely. It is my. I wouldn't even say it as a goal. I'd almost say it's like achieved. I don't know if I don't like saying things are achieved, but on a personal level, I just see people now. They're just people. Everyone's just people.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Um,
I like
like,
that.
and when you start talking about their pigment, I think it's weird. Uh, it's just plain weird. I know it's part of our culture, and I know that it's a racist system, and people that's what people talk about. But it's just plain weird. Like when I'm looking at my students, the idea that I'm gonna know anything about any of these students based on how much pigment is in their skin is ridiculous.
Well, yeah, no, and I think for all, a lot of these discussions, um, I I think I've tried to point out and say that, a lot of what you're talking about when it comes to racism doesn't just exist with like white people. It's not a white person problem, right? I mean, you would agree. I think that's what we're
I don't even believe white people exist, Ron.
okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, that's fine. That's like
Like
that's okay. You don't have to. I'm just I know you don't. I'm just saying
Europeans
yeah, Europeans,
or poorly
whatever.
pigmented. Do I think people who don't have a lot of pigment in their skin experience stuff? Is that what you're asking?
Well, no, no. I mean, whether you're poorly pigmented or richly pigmented, you're capable of being and saying things that are racist, right? It's not a poorly pigmented problem.
All right. You know, because you asked, can you see what's on my screen?
Yes.
So we have the FBI 2007 hate crime statistics, and this is directly related to what you just said. So don't
Okay.
think I'm changing the subject. It's going to take me a second to get there, but I'm talking to you about what you just said. That's why I'm going here. Okay?
Okay. Can you tell me what I just said though? Can you point
Repeat
out
it, Jeff. Repeat it to him.
make sure we're on the same page?
Do so-called white people experience this stuff too? Right?
What? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Do so-called white people experience racism too?
Yeah, and vice versa.
Yes, I heard
Are
you.
they? Are, what?
Yeah, I heard you.
Yes.
Okay. Um, so the first thing is just a fun fact. Now I've heard no one talk about this, and it's so unbelievable that it's unbelievable. But I'm just gonna. Can you see my screen? Because I'm gonna type something that's gonna appear, and it's just if it's true, it's so crazy. If
Mm-hmm.
you look at the screen, it says FBI releases 2017 hate crime statistics. And in
Mm-hmm.
the opening paragraph, it says that in the year 2017 data, I'll highlight it here,
Mm-hmm.
that 16,149 law enforcement agencies provided information about offenses. And they put a little parenthesis here. That's up 5.9% from the 15,254 agencies from last the year before 2016. And as a math nerd, I couldn't help but say, wait a minute, you're telling me that almost 1,000 more agencies provided information than the year before? Obviously, that's going to affect your total numbers, right?
Yeah.
And specifically, they had.
That's so bad.
But look at it says of these agencies, it says that It says that 2040 reported 7,175 hate crime incidents involving 8,434
Wow.
things, right? Okay. To which you might say, who cares?
Wow. Yeah, well, when they say
But
that they've increased by so much percent, that's a big deal when they're using a larger sample size.
yes, 5%, 6% more actually.
Yeah, I guess I just thought all the agencies report every year because we're really good at data.
Yeah,
That's
so
horrific. That's a horrifically lazy
I'm saying it's
reporting
unbelievable.
of
It's
data. That's
unbelievable.
terrible.
So the first thing I noticed just in the opening paragraph as I was doing my little research is that there's a 6% increase in the number of agencies reporting. Now that let alone is interesting, but also, were these large agencies, were they small agencies? Who knows? But still, the idea that you're not going to get an increase in the numbers is kind of crazy. So you need a percent, not a number. And I'd like to know the percent per capita, not the number of crimes. So that's the first.
Wow.
That's just a fun fact. But Ron, assuming you can see my screen, who are the offenders? Who are the ones committing the hate crimes? I don't know if it's too small. Is it too small?
Yeah, I can't say that.
How about now?
I
Can you
still
read it?
can't see it.
Half of them
Into
are
does.
committed by white people.
Yeah.
What percent of the United States is white?
Um, I think I think it's going to be in the lower percentage at this point, right?
61%.
How much?
61% according to what I'm looking at on the screen.
Yeah.
So for something that's kind of interesting here is that a smaller percentage of the actual population commits hate crimes.
Wait, does
Then
the FBI's data count me as a white person? Because it goes like different reporting agencies do different things. Sometimes Hispanics are white, sometimes they're not. How do they account for Hispanics?
it appears that you're white because I'm just learning this
Well,
things.
In
yeah.
according to the FBI, the one that you the 50% one, they include Hispanics in the white.
Correct. I believe that's the case. I've just learned this in the last year or so that
Well, you have to be careful
Hispanic.
with each thing that you look at.
Yeah,
With
well,
each
you're gonna find. I don't know if you can see my screen or not, but you're gonna see it right now that they deal with that. So just hold on a second, and you'll see that you'll see
But
that
I would say, Jeff, let me ask you something. None of this is relevant to your point, though. If we're going to talk about hate crimes, we would leave all this data off the table.
Well, you asked me about white versus black, and I'm
No,
responding to your specific question. But and to your point, I do think that if someone's going to play the game of race, they should at least use the numbers and be thoughtful about them.
well, why don't yeah, well, when we talk about the non not using these colors, it would be interesting if you had that same information for the hate crimes and just break it down by the socioeconomic status. So many percentages were committed by people of this class and this class and this, like earning so much money per year. That would probably be
Also,
one way to break down the data. And then you can break down the data based on education levels or maybe based on ages. I bet most of these hate crimes are done by men from 18 to 28.
that's in
That's just
here,
a wild guess. So
but
yeah,
so
that's
they
probably
break
all
down
in there.
these crimes by all those different things, or is it
they
primarily
do.
focused on the skin tone? Why are
They
you
do.
playing this skin tone game, Jeff? That's a good question that Ron had.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't agree with him. I mean, I agree with him totally. Let me
So
be
just
back. I
blow it
agree with
all
him.
away. Say this is
I
a
agree with
dumb
him.
way of breaking
Hold
down
on,
these
hold on. I
crimes.
agree with him pointing it out, but this is the data on race hate crime. So if in the area of admitting that racism exists, if you're going to have data on so-called hate crimes, then this would be the area of showing that things do exist.
Well, yeah, and that's fine. That's fine. And I would say, as pointed out in a lot of different ways with what Dana just said, there's different ways to break down this data. And we've talked about education levels, age, but also what qualifies as a hate crime. What exactly falls into that category? So that would be
Well,
another.
I'm gonna go over all that. You guys just need to hold your horses.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
Now, a quick comment, 20% were unknown, so really I should do 50 divided by 80. So it's actually closer, it's close to the population of white people matching the statistics. So that's maybe not that meaningful, but it is interesting that half the crimes here are reported by white people. So when the news agencies, that's the part I just find so interesting. When the news agencies talk about these numbers going up, the complexity of it is that half of the people aren't, we don't even know the race of the offender. Does that make sense? That's really interesting, right?
Would a
20% of the
political
people they're
leaning be
talking about
important?
are black, according to this.
Do you think the political leaning of somebody would be important?
I think that would be very important, but I just think it's funny when they talk about it in the news. Right here, it says 20% were black or African American. So if 20% of the hate crimes are reported as by black or African American, are they even, when the newscasters and the people discussing things, are they even realizing that they're talking about African Americans committing hate crimes? Like, that's the part that blows my mind. They don't even know, they probably don't even know that it's possible that these hate crimes are actually African Americans committing hate crimes. That's the part that I find fascinating is,
Yeah.
do they even know, like, in their minds, do they really think it's all white people that are Nazis attacking blacks and homosexuals? Like, is that in their brain and they just don't realize there's other possible categories of hate crimes? I just think that's very interesting because that's what you hear in the media. It's always white on black, and also you hear the homosexual hate crimes.
Yeah.
But there's other hate crimes. So let's go
Okay.
through this though. Dana, you talked about this whole "Are you white?" and I've just learned recently that you are. And then it has ethnicity below that, and it says 25% were of the ethnicity category not Hispanic, 8.8% were Hispanic, and then 65% were unknown. So they do have this weird thing where if you're white, you can be Hispanic white, and you can be non-Hispanic white, which I just learned recently in statistics. But unfortunately, they don't break down the ages very well. But 83% are 18 and over. Amazingly, 17% are under 18. Almost 20% of these crimes are committed by people under 18. Are you surprised by that?
No.
And then here we go. The types, Ron, you're interested in 38.8%, or just, about 40% is assault, about 35% is intimidation, about 25% is aggravated assault, 0.7% rape, 0.3% murder, 0.3% is murder. Now, rape and murder are horrendous crimes, but it's almost good to know that it's only 0.3 and 0.7% of the total. So it's 15 people in 2017 were killed and 30 people were raped. Horrendous, disgusting, gross. But thankfully, those numbers are lower than you might expect, right?
Um. Well, yeah. No. So you're how many people?
That's
37.
45 people in the United States were raped or murdered based on a hate crime.
Yeah. So I wonder what exactly qualifies as a hate crime? Does it say?
I believe it does, but if you want me to look for that, I'll get it. Um, and that's against persons, so it's actually lesser than that because that's half the crimes were against person, and then that number of those persons I gave you is the percent of half of those crimes. So that's the offenders, right? So who's receiving the racism, which gets back to your question a long time ago. So the victims, 60% was based on race or ethnicity or ancestry, 20% was based on religion. For the race, 48%, the majority was uh, anti-black or African American. Next on the list, 17% was anti-white. And so of the hate crimes, it's interesting to note that half of them were against, and it says anti-black or African American, and almost 20% were anti-white. Which does get back to your question, right?
Yeah, yeah, man. What exactly would qualify as a hate crime? What falls into that category?
I'll have to go look at the definition, but a few things I think are clear. One, you have
Because I
to.
here's what I wonder. Here's what I wonder. Like, so we, like I said, political leaning, right? Possible, a white liberal attacked a black conservative.
I don't know what you're asking me.
Well, I'm just saying, what I'm saying is when we talk about these statistics, there's a lot of other things that are, should be considered, right? I mean, that's why I'm asking, like, what exactly qualifies like for like a hate crime? What's in that? You know what I mean? What are they putting in these categories of like, a hate crime?
I'm gonna have to get that definition for you, but without knowing the definition, just going off the numbers without knowing that definition, I think it's noteworthy that one, whites, so-called whites, do experience whatever this crime is. Certainly at a lesser rate than the population of so-called whites, because if the population is around 60, having 20% of the crimes, approximately speaking, that's a lot less. Whereas for African Americans, they are experiencing a much greater rate of hate crimes relative to how their population matches up. So one thing you can take from this is certainly, with certainty, we can say that people with dark skin are certainly being mistreated at a much higher rate than people with white skin. But we also have to admit that there is racism going all around.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I mean, to your earlier point, I mean, none of that should really matter. Um, if if you're going to exclude it, none of this would really be a factor in the conversation. We'd be talking about some other stuff when it comes to you know the specifics about this. Race wouldn't be at all focused on.
Well, again, that's not actually what I said. What I'm saying is racism is real. That's what the numbers are showing us. Racism is real. It is a real problem, and it's something that needs to be discussed in some form. So that's sort of a national world reality. That's true. These numbers all show that racism is real. It's disproportionate towards people with lots of pigment in their skin. It is a real problem. If you talk to anybody who has a lot of pigment, they will tell you the stories of the experiences that they have. So remember, a component of what I'm saying is it is real, it is happening. The numbers show it, the conversations show it, all that. But I'm talking now on a personal level. So for me personally, uh, I would hope that I have none of those thoughts or factors in any of my brain whatsoever, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I think an interesting excuse me, an interesting discussion would be having, talking about these things without bringing up race and talking about the other important factors but again, I mean, I think for starters, what qualifies exactly as a hate crime? What falls under that umbrella?
I'm gonna look that up for you, okay?
Yeah. I mean,
And Dana's gonna entertain you while I'm doing that.
so I mean, if we're not going to talk about race as a factor, Dana, where would a starting point in these discussions be? And what would you talk about? Males? Is it dominant male dominant? Should that be pointed out?
Dana's asleep.
Yeah, she don't.
I talked for too long.
Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, is gender a factor? Is that a fair discussion? Should that also be left out?
Talking to me?
Yeah, or whoever. Dana's obviously not talking.
I think it's my bedtime. Maybe everything's not a fact. Maybe everything's off the table. Jeff started drinking this Huel stuff. It's called Huel, Huel. It means human fuel, like a powdered nutritional equivalent for all your daily calories. And it's just this, like if you don't wash out the cup soon after you drink it, like the remaining Huel turns into like cement, I guess, overnight. It's just this, he got the tasteless flavor. So it's like drinking tasteless, bland, or not tasteless, like drinking blended cardboard.
Yeah, it does kind of have a cardboard taste to it.
So maybe that's kind of a word picture for what is on the table for Jeff going forward. No textures, no colors, no crunch. Just Huel. We're all Huel. Oh, I was just kidding. I do need to go to bed though. I'm gonna have lots to think about tonight. But I gotta go to bed. I'm severely sleep deprived.
Well, that is a great way.
Do you want to shoot us off into space, Jeff?
Oh, I love shooting people off into space. It takes me a little bit of effort though, but I'm getting there. Oh no, I have bad news, Ron. I accidentally closed our audio program. But good news, I have good news though. It's not that hard to open it.
Well, you better go drink your Huel.